As everyone knows, Gorbachev passed away on Tuesday and has been lying in state, has been buried, I believe, today. So, yes, as the title says, who was Gorbachev? What did he stand for? I think that we should, there's going to be a lot of discussion about the crimes and, positives and negatives of Gorbachev. I think we should start with some music from the 1980s, which was made in his honor. And then we can start the discussion on whether, a crime was committed. So I'll share this one here. Here we go. This one here. Clap your hands for Mikhail Gorbachev. So I'm just going to share this one. Here we go.
Oh, wow, those pants.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, everybody. There's a new man.
Can you hear?
Oh, yes. And he is really, really special. His name is Mikhail Gorbachev.
Mikhail Gorbachev.
All right, there you go. So clap your hands.
Is this another example of the Soviet cult of personality?
I mean, maybe. It sounds like it, right? So I actually don't know who this artist is, but there's a whole bunch of really interesting music from the late 80s, which is a bunch of different songs dedicated to Mikhail Gorbachev. And we'll be playing another one later, as well as the infamous Pizza Hut commercial, and also a Louis Vuitton advert, which he appeared in as well. So that one's just a print. So we'll talk about that too. We'll add that to it as well. But yeah, there we go. Clap your hands for Mikhail Gorbachev. So I don't know, Chris, I don't know where you wanted to start with this. We can talk about, his birth and who he was and where he came from. There's a nice thing I found on his official Gorbachev Foundation website. If you want to read that, I don't know if you've got something specific. What do you have in mind?
Well, to be honest, it seems like you've started a little bit before me. I basically started my research at the point where he came to power. So yeah, by all means, take
sure. Yeah. Let's read it up here. I'll bring it up here on the main page. So this, like I said, is from his from his foundation. So let me just share this here. The Gorbachev Foundation. And 1 second, let's dig it up here. And it gives you a short sort of detail of his life, where he was from, where he was born, and all this kind of stuff. So just put that up there, and it's sort of how his foundation chooses to depict him, which is actually quite revealing in my opinion. So yeah, I'll read this. Let me read this. It's not too long. So Mikhail Gorbachev was born on March 2nd, 1931 in the village of Privolnyoy in a very complicated named district in the south of Russia. Born to a Ukrainian peasant family who moved to the Stavropol territory from the Russian Voronezh region and from Chernigov province in the Ukraine. His father, Sergei, worked as a combine harvester operator, very Soviet. In June 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. In August, he was drafted to the regular army and put in charge of a combat engineering squad. He was in many historic battles of the war. In the end of May 1944, the Gorbachev family received a killed in action notice for his father. For 3 days, the family was weeping for the loss, but fortunately, it was a mistake. Mikhail's father had survived, though was badly wounded in the leg. For his exploits during the war, he got government medals, Medal for Bravery, and 2 Orders of the Red Star. After he returned home, Sergei Gorbachev continued to work as a machine operator and taught Mikhail to operate a combine harvester. Father knew perfectly how to operate the combine, and he taught me, Gorbachev recalls. After a year or two, I could adjust any mechanism. I am particularly proud of my ability to detect a fault in the combine instantly, just by the sound of it. For outstanding results in bringing the bumper crop in 1949, Mikhail Gorbachev was awarded the Order of the Red Banner of Labor. He was only 17 then and became the youngest recipient of this high award. So that's quite interesting. I didn't know that. He was the youngest recipient of the Red Banner of Labor. Yeah, that's pretty big deal. So yeah, his mother, Maria Gorbachev, was a farmer, and all her life she worked on a collective farm. Purges of the 1930s affected the Gorbachev family. In 1937, Mikhail Gorbachev's grandfather, Gobkalo, was arrested on charges of being a member of a counter-revolutionary Trotskyite organization. He was kept in prison for 14 months under investigation and torture. Assistant Attorney General of Stavropol saved him from execution. In December 1938, he was released from prison and returned home. In 1939, he was once again elected chairman of the collective farm. The other grandfather of Mikhail Gorbachev, Andrei Gorbachev, initially was uneager to join a collective farm and farm by himself on his individual farmstead. In 1933, there was a severe drought in southern Russia, and the region was hit by mass famine. His 3 children out of 6 died of starvation. In spring 1934, Andrei Gorbachev was arrested for not fulfilling the sowing campaign plan. There was nothing to sow. As a saboteur, Gorbachev was sent to a hard labor camp in the Irkutsk region, Siberia, worked as a timber feller. 2 years later, in 1935, on account of his good work, he was released before his sentence term expired. He came back to Privolnoye and immediately joined the collective farm, where he worked to the end of his life, enjoying great respect among his fellow farmers. So this is where we get to, of course, Gorbachev himself. He lived with his grandparents mostly, and then he was doing extremely well in school. In those early school years, he developed a passion for knowledge and interest in everything new, and he kept those makings for the rest of his life. His hobby was a drama studio at school, where he performed on the stage. Once the drama studio went on a tour to the villages within the region, the young performers earned some money from tickets to their performances, and with this money, they bought 35 pairs of shoes for kids from very poor families who had been barefoot at school. You still there, Chris? I think so.
I'm still there, sorry.
There we go. In 1950, Gorbachev graduated from high school with a silver medal. His father insisted that the youth continued his education, and Mikhail chose the Moscow State University as the best university in the USSR. He was enrolled to the university without entrance exams and even without an interview. He was summoned to the university by cable, saying that he was enrolled and provided with a hostel accommodation. There were several reasons for that: Gorbachev's origin as a farmer, his work record, a high government award, the Order of the Red Banner of Labor, and also the fact that in 1950, when doing his last year of studies at the secondary school, he was admitted candidate member of the Communist Party. Gorbachev recalls, "My years at the university were not just extremely interesting, but also a period of hard work. I had to do a lot of catching up. I knew I had knowledge gaps from my village school. The gaps made themselves felt, especially at first when I came to the university. But frankly, I always had a lot of ambition. The Moscow University gave me fundamental knowledge and an intellectual potential that determined my career. It was here that the long process of reassessing my country's history, its present and its future began and continued over so many years." When a university student, Gorbachev met his future wife, Raisa Titarenko. She was also a student at the Moscow University philosophy faculty. She was 1 year his junior, but joined the university 1 year before him. They married on the 25th of September, 1953. Having received his law degree, cum laude, in 1955, Gorbachev returned to Stavropol. At first, he was assigned to a job in the Stavropol Territorial Prosecutor's Office. In Stavropol, Gorbachev was remembered from his activity in the Young Communist League branch at schools as a committed youth and a gifted organizer. So almost at once, Gorbachev was offered a position of an assistant director of the propaganda department at the Territorial Committee of the Komsomol Youth League, the YCL. So his work record at the prosecutor's office lasted only 10 days. In September 1956, Gorbachev became first secretary of the Stavropol City Komsomol Committee. In April 1958, he was elected second secretary of Stavropol Territorial Komsomol Committee, and March 1961, first secretary of the Stavropol Territorial Komsomol Committee. In 1966, Gorbachev becomes first secretary and bureau member of the Stavropol City Communist Party Committee. In August 1969, second secretary of the Stavropol Territorial Communist Party Committee. Then in April 1970, Gorbachev was approved as the first secretary of the Stavropol Territorial Communist Party Committee. The most important element in his program for developing the Stavropol region was the rational placement of agricultural facilities, their specialization, the establishment of advanced poultry farms and agrarian complexes, the introduction of industrial production processes, the construction of the Greater Stavropol Canal, and of the irrigation and water supply systems that were vitally important to the region, with its risky farming because dry lands accounted for 1/2 of its agriculture area, and the completion of modernization in the light and food industries. So I'm just going to skip a little bit ahead here. So basically did lots of regional development stuff in Stavropol, health, and also he also at this point meets a lot of the further up higher ranking members of the party, such as Alexei Kosygin and Yuri Andropov, which is very important because he is the one who brings him into the Central Committee later and pushes him later. Yuri Andropov being one of the two guys that died in the 80s with very short terms.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, then talking about Reisa. Yeah. So you can see from 57 to 78, there's 20 years there, which is not really, or 10 years there. That's not really detailed, but he's in Stavropol doing party stuff. And then
So
November 78, the plenary session of the CPSU Central Committee. Yeah. So he gets membership. Right. Yeah. I think he gets membership, as I said, from high school here. Yeah. So yes. So 78, he gets on the Central Committee. Yeah. So November 27th, 1978, the plenary session of the CPSU Central Committee elects Gorbachev Central Committee secretary. On December 78, he and his family moved to Moscow. Okay. His first job was overseeing agriculture. He had traveled extensively in the USSR and made official visits abroad. And very soon, Mikhail Gorbachev displayed himself as a responsible, efficient, and principled political figure. 2 years after he moved to Moscow, he became member of the Politburo, the supreme body of the Soviet Communist Party. Then it goes on to the stuff that we all know about. In March 85, Gorbachev is elected General Secretary of the CPSU Central Committee. Gorbachev initiated the process of change in the Soviet Union. What was later called perestroika, glasnost, and openness became perestroika's driving force. A program of reforms was planned to put the nation's economy on track to a socially oriented market economy. This policy put an end to the totalitarian regime in the USSR. In 1990, state power moved from the Communist Party, the Congress of People's Deputies of the USSR, the first parliament in Soviet history made on the basis of free, democratic, and uncontested election. Okay, so yeah, this pushes us to 1990. I'm not going to read the rest because I think that's where we all kind of, well, this is where our discussion is going to be about perestroika, glasnost, the breakup of the Soviet Union, his relationship with the West. I've read this before. So one thing, I'm just going to notice one thing. So after the breakup of the Soviet Union, what was very interesting here is he makes a run for president in 1996 in Russia and gets 0.5% of the vote. So a complete disgrace, basically, a complete failure. And later, he set up the, one second here, Social Democratic. Here we go. So Gorbachev took part in the 96 election in Russia and was nominated to stand for the Russian Federation presidency. And it says this on his website, Gorbachev is a convinced social democrat, the founder of the Russian United Social Democratic Party, the Social Democratic Party of Russia, and the All Russia Public Movement, the League of Social Democrats. I've looked into those organizations, and all of those are basically defunct. They no longer operate.
I've noticed all. I think there was a Liberal Party as well.
Right. So, I mean, just off the bat, there's a big question mark there. It's like, well, if this guy was a communist, through and through, and was a Leninist, as he always attempted to describe himself historically, then why didn't he stay with the Communist Party or make a new Communist Party? He abandoned, that even any of the trimmings of being a communist. It seems, if you look at his political career after 96 or after 1991, I guess. So yeah. Go ahead. What are your thoughts on that?
Even with a lot of stuff that he sort of espoused, like you said, his relationship with the West. What I think is even more telling is his relationship with the Communist Party. So when he got in 85, he was proposed by Andrei Gromyko, who was one of the ambassadors in the Politburo. He was one of Brezhnev's ambassadors to the US. Americans knew him as a sort of a hardliner, emotionless, humorless, typical Soviet bureaucrat, somebody deep distrust for the West. So this guy proposes for Gorbachev to be put on to be the general secretary. And none of them really knew anything about Gorbachev other than his sort of CV for his party work. And as you've just read there, a lot of it sounds good. Like, it doesn't espouse that he's going to do anything radical. Like, there doesn't seem to be any hint that anything's going to go on. But when he got in, he immediately moved people in different posts. He got rid of people by forcing them into retirement, people that he knew would oppose him. Even the person who proposed him in the first place, he moved into the position of head of state, which was at that point pretty much a symbolic role with little power. But he knew that the Politburo could and would remove him. And this was something that haunted him throughout his entire tenure as general secretary. to the point of that's why he proposed for the Council of Deputies to make him president of the Soviet Union, because then he couldn't be removed by the Politburo. That was the entire reasoning for being president instead of general secretary. That's why it's always the first and last president of the Soviet Union. Also,
right.
A little
I also
tidbit
believe
as well.
he ran unopposed, right? Unopposed for that role as well. There was no one else who actually ran, right?
Yeah, it was elected by the Council of Deputies because he didn't want it to be an open election to the populace in case he lost.
Right.
Because he was already at this point deeply unpopular. But he, as we know, he was on a crusade to do something quite intentional, despite what he has said in certain interviews where he's claimed that, I didn't mean to just dissolve the Soviet Union. He almost sort of does it in you know how people say with Abraham Lincoln, where they use that quote, if I could have ended the Civil War without freeing any slaves, I would have done. They sort of use that Gorbachev to the point, if I could have saved the Soviet Union by just getting rid of communism, I would have done. But that doesn't seem to have been the goal. It always seemed to have been the complete dismantling of the system that he seemed to, between him and his wife and a few of the conspirators. And it seemed that by the time everyone else caught on to what was happening, it was too late. There'd already been at this point, I believe, 3 different attempts of reform. There was a reform under Brezhnev. Because as a lot of viewers will know, under Khrushchev, one of the things that people point out of him is he didn't do collective leadership. He took all the roles and he didn't really speak to the rest of the Politburo for advice, and it made him very unpopular. So when he was eventually deposed, Brezhnev did split those roles up. He was only the general secretary of the Communist Party. He wasn't head of state. Alexander, so I've got this name here, Koizhin was the premier, and he proposed these first set of reforms in the 1979. Basically, it was a set of changes of the economy introduce profitability and sales as key indicators of entrepreneurial success. Didn't go very far, then they tried more reforms in 73 and 79. Again, they weren't implemented at all. So then at this point, we're well into what history calls the area of stagnation. So you've got Brezhnev, who had a fair rule. You could argue after Khrushchevism, maybe Brezhnev was an attempt to sort of bring things back in line in a limited sense, especially with the Brezhnev doctrine, the idea of a lot of the interventions in like Prague Spring, Afghanistan were Brezhnev's idea of sort of solidifying the socialist camp and fortressifying it. So you could argue there was some sort of limited, sort of tanky-ish action. That's where we literally get the word tanky from.
Right.
After that, guys, one that you talked about earlier on, Yuri Andropov, who was only in office for 2 years and then died. And then the next guy, Konstantin Chernikov, was in it for 13 months and died. So by the time Gorbachev came along, I think a lot of people were just happy that there was a young man, 50, young enough that it stopped. People were sick, as we are, especially Americans are now, of electing octogenarians. Like, why are all these old men coming in and they can't last? Leader of the Soviet Union, who was actually born in the Soviet Union.
That's right.
I mean, as opposed to the Russian Empire. You think he was born in was it 23? So 6 years.
Yes, that's right. Well, actually, I think it's wasn't it 31? Sorry, wasn't it 31?
31.
31. Born in 31. He's born in 31. Yeah, so 10 years into the Soviet Union. Yeah.
He was a baby compared to the rest of the Central Committee.
He was much younger. Yeah. I think that is obviously like it's quite a big thing we've taken off the chew today, because where do you sort of there's the leadership element, there's the the generational thing about the leadership structure, then you've got the sort of the reforms, the profit, sort of whether profit was being used or how it was being introduced, the price control, subsidization, there's loads of different elements, and then the nationalism too. I mean, if you're going further to the breakup, the actual beginning of the breakup. I mean, just some of the stuff that, we're watching a couple of documentaries and reading a couple of things. One thing that did surprise me is that this term perestroika, when it came out, and there's a third word, acceleration, which I've forgotten the Russian for.
Yes,
but
yeah.
Right. So that one was actually first. That one came out first, the acceleration term, and then it was perestroika. And the thing that stood out to me is that it wasn't very clear what perestroika actually was. It was almost a slogan, and then it started to mean certain things, and it was almost built on the fly, on the move. This what it actually meant. What was it going to be? Was it going to be privatization? Was it going to be getting rid of wholesale prices controlled by the state? Was it going to be this or that? It was quite. From a lot of the interviews, if you look at the guys who are still around who were there, they say it wasn't particularly clear, and that was one of the problems. And that's one of the things that if you're talking about a characteristic of the leadership, is that there is a degree of indecisiveness from Gorbachev. He did sort of show indecisiveness and a lack of resoluteness, and then also inconsistency too. I mean, so a lot of Western portrayal right now that's going around talk about the fact that he didn't send the tanks into Berlin and into the Eastern European republics and countries to stop the protests and to stop the coups and stopping the counter-revolutions and all of this kind of stuff. But actually, in some cases, he did. For example, in Georgia, he did send tanks in, and he did send tanks into, I think, Abkhazia. So the idea that he didn't do anything, it doesn't suit the ground. What's that?
Lithuania as well.
Lithuania, right. Yeah, exactly. They sent the special forces in. So the idea that he didn't send anyone in is like, well, he did. He just didn't send. He tried to sort of play a both. Sort of, I'll try not to send too many troops, but I'll send some troops, but not enough to deal with the solution. So you ended up with this indecisive sort of half measure in dealing with those protests and dealing with.
I think a lot of his sort of ideology and his sort of continuity has all been decided and canonized out after the fact. Like, I don't think you could have read the book in 1985, What Does Gorbachev Believe? Because I don't think he really believed much of anything. And I think from what we've sort of read, I think a lot of it, he doesn't really understand how he's in the position that he's in the first place. He's a man who's completely ill-suited to be in a role that he found himself in, purely with the incompetence of the people around him, by the sounds of it.
Well, I think this is the part that I think is certainly damning for the Soviet system, is that you had this individual come in, you had two senior leaders die from old age and illness, or mostly from illness, but and then this third individual come along and then make all these decisions and make poor decisions and not having some sort of accountability or some sort of means to recall, or I don't know, just from whichever way you look at it, it's obviously clearly there was a leadership crisis. There was a deep leadership crisis from the late 70s until it fell apart. And the fact that Gorbachev even got in was a symptom of that. And then Gorbachev then became its sort of prime symptom of a leadership crisis. He was not. I mean, again, with talking about it today, the main thing you'll notice about the outpourings and comments being made on Gorbachev is that his sort of biggest supporters are people like Boris Johnson, European Union leaders, Biden, the West. You're talking about Western leaders. Western leaders are singing his praises, whereas Russian people who lived underneath him, are not as big of a fan of him. So it's politically useful. It's convenient for them to sort of say, oh, look, this is the man that we should have.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting with the BBC, their coverage of the funeral, where on the video, they actually pointed out that said hundreds of people attended the funeral. And when you watch the video, it's a very sorry sort of affair for what you expect. Like I'm pretty sure they even asked people to line up single file so that it looks a little bit longer, but it literally was hundreds, where the website says, they said, let's say thousands, so it looks big, but it was hundreds. Definitely. The fact that it wasn't a state funeral, the fact that Putin, I'm too busy to go, that felt, it says a lot that it's just like no communist representatives went, because why would they? You know that the people, if there wasn't the fact that the Ukraine crisis is going on, you know that the Clintons would be there, Obama would be, and they'd be the people wanting to make the speech.
Sure.
Mike
Yeah.
Reagan would want to be there to speak for his dad, and
I mean, actually, that's quite telling, actually, because in preparing for this episode, I quickly skimmed over the funeral of Andropov, and just to see who's standing and to see in what health condition Chernihiv is in. They said that he was already dying when he took office. But nonetheless, what's interesting is Margaret Thatcher actually went there and was, she goes and sees the coffin and pays her respects. And the fact that the Western leaders aren't doing that now does tell us how actually much further in terms of tension and conflict the West and East are compared to even then during the Cold War. You're talking about a time when Margaret Thatcher went in, was there. That didn't happen this time. Yeah, this
funeral to what we had last week of Alexander Dugin's daughter, her funeral. Whatever you think about Dugin, or even if you don't know anything about Dugin, you know that Dugin is a symbol of at least Russian anti-Americanism. And the fact that that funeral got the reception that it did, the size that it did, and Gorbachev has got so little, that contrast is a message in itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Deep into Dugin's sort of philosophy or his theories to know that there's a message being sent by these two.
Well, I think what we should watch now is we should jump in with the Pizza Hut commercial, because I think in itself it has a bit of political commentary in it. So
it does. Let's watch and just react as we go along.
Yeah. Let's just put this on. Let's put this on. Here we go.
Это Горбачев. Это из-за него у нас в экономике бардак.
Благодаря ему у нас новые возможности.
Это из-за него у нас политическая нестабильность.
Благодаря ему у нас свобода.
Полный хаос.
Перспективы.
Политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас есть и соглад.
За Горбачева!
За Горбачева!
За Горбачева!
Sometimes nothing brings people together like a nice hot pizza from Pizza Hut.
Oh, there you go. There it is.
What's amazing is that what did you catch the date at the beginning of that?
97 or 98, I believe. Yeah. So, I mean,
the street still would have been absolutely filthy at that point. Like, obviously, you had the crisis in 93, but obviously the Russian state at this point is a rump state. In 1997, they've just had an election.
Yeah, I mean, they actually do have there's an economic. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I thought you froze again. Yeah. So at that point, they just had an election, I believe, that the Communist Party won, but then Bill Clinton helped them sort of cheat to get Yeltsin elected by the skin of his teeth again.
That's right. Yes. Well, actually, yes. So actually, the election. So if this is 97, that video, the Pizza Hut commercial, Gorbachev would have also taken part in the 96 election and got 0.5% of the vote. So I feel like, if the Russians were having a discussion of whether they like what Gorbachev has done or whether he could do a good job, they already spoke a year before that or 2 years before that. Yeah, and you're right. Yeah, that would have been the 96 election where Zyuganov would have won, but Clinton basically, I think they endorsed him, which effectively distorted the voting mechanism, and then also there was something about financing that they broke the rules on how much spending.
There's some electioneering going on, wasn't there? But in terms of actual votes,
So
Communist Party
yes.
won that election.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about the if you want to talk about perestroika specifically, glasnost, I don't know. I find it a bit unwieldy. If you want to go into it, it's I've got some stuff about what kinds of things it meant.
So obviously, I mentioned a bit how unpopular within the party he was when he first got in. So I've got that within his first year, 14 out of the 23 heads of department of secretaries were replaced by him. Basically, he was packing the chambers with loyalists. Someone actually wrote here that he actually did that faster than Stalin, Khrushchev, or Brezhnev actually managed to achieve. He was that scared that he was going to get replaced.
Wow.
So, like I said earlier on, where sometimes it feels like he's just stumbling around in the dark and just things are happening. But then certain things like this make me think, well, that seems very calculated to do that.
Right.
So I've got here, before that, so obviously with glasnost, obviously with the way people were feeling after the era of stagnation and just let down, the idea of glasnost being this free pass to openly criticize the government and the party, it feels like just the worst timing to do that. Like, it's like getting someone absolutely pissed and asking them, what do you think of me, really? It's like, you can't then be shocked when they just start abusing you. It's like, well, why did you get me pissed first?
Right.
At that point, that was clearly the wrong time to bring in that sort of reform when you're economically at your lowest. Not in terms of, maybe not in terms of GDP, but in terms of people's living standards. And in terms of the government, like, all your leaders keep dying. Like, people are losing faith in the political system.
It's a good observation. It's a great observation. Yeah. No, I think you've made a good point there. That you've got, obviously, there was this stagnation because of quotas not being met and sort of truancy, as they called it, workers like not being eager to work. Also, a problem with alcoholism, which he tried to deal with. He tried to ban alcohol and. So I think obviously trying to introduce reforms, you do need to do that to try and change things, but the manner in which it was done, initially some of the stuff failed. And also then I think, personally, I think that the economic stuff, they could have, changed and done sort of, this sort of Chinese style of rationalization. They could have pursued that in a more bottom-up kind of way. But the political side, I think, is where it really was dangerous. Playing with this allowance of nationalist movements and parties and sentiment to come into this new political structure, this sort of quote unquote bicameral parliament and stuff. That was, that really, you already had, yes, like you said, sort of unhappiness and unease with economics, people queuing, problems with production and problems with all sorts of stuff like that. Then to sort of throw in, okay, well now, people can start talking about their nation as a separate nation and drive these nationalist sentiments. Of course, the nationalists then capitalized on it straight away. They go, well, you're a Lithuanian, and if we had a Lithuanian country, it would be way better than this, because look how bad it is, and it's been bad for 5 years or 10 years. Come on, let's be Lithuanian. So the political sort of narrative is so easy to spin for the nationalists. Open up the political space to nationalists at a time when the union is weak. Terrible combination. The history is there.
Obviously, that's what we've experienced, obviously, in the UK, in Europe, in the past decade at least, with the SNP in Scotland, with Catalonia. It's such a repeated playbook. Like, this idea of an oligarchy telling you that, you'll be better off with our rich capitalists than the international ones.
Yes.
Obviously, everything that was going on in the Soviet Union at that point. This is where we get into the end of the 80s, where the international socialist camp, opportunities in there, smell weakness, and think, well, the Soviet Union aren't going to react to anything we do. So when the counter-revolutions of 89 happened, they knew that it was nothing good like Brezhnev going to come and help restore order, like what happened in Czechoslovakia. And that didn't happen. Gorbachev completely ignored what was happening in Czechoslovakia, again, in Hungary. Even when
Poland.
In Romania, they literally murdered Ceausescu and his wife.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
regardless of
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
anyone thinks about them, like, there must have been a better way to handle it than that. They were the only ones to have been killed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think this is a good point where we can bring up the sort of sum total of the deaths and economic fallout of people dying from excess death from economic hardship, whatnot, versus crackdowns. So yes, a crackdown it's a violent thing, it's a violent act.
But it's
People
one
die.
sudden burst of violence.
Right. So, but it's restoring order. So if you consider that, allowing for everything to fall apart and also bear in mind the movements themselves were not all peaceful either. So
No.
people going and protesting and breaking stuff and burning things and Molotov petrol sort of like, and also shooting. There was violence also in the political acts of the
Romania, for
Democrats.
example, the event that caused the Romanian counter-revolution, which was a like massacre in I can't remember the name. It begins with T and it's in northern Romania. But there was rumors that were circulating of mass killings in that area due to a crackdown on an uprising. We now know that was fabricated by the West. That event never happened.
Right.
The thing that caused the counter-revolution to actually the catalyst was a made-up event.
Yeah. I think. Obviously, I've got I want to show statistics here. I've got something from the. It's a chart that's. It's not actually got to get the chart is too small, but we can read the statistics. But just a quick look at the stats on how many people died and how much economic collapse you're talking about. So, can you see that? Yeah, we can see that. A decade. So this is just a decade, but so this actually continues on for longer. Like the decline does not pick up. I think in some cases, I was reading somewhere that most of the former Soviet republics, as well as the Eastern Bloc countries, most of them didn't recover and meet their 1989 levels until 2012 or 2015. There's some outliers who, maybe got there in 2006 or something like that. But generally, there was not a recovery to the same level for 25 years. A quarter of a century of lost growth, of poverty, of prostitution, of crime, of all sorts of stuff. But I mean, here's some of the stats. So GDP fell by 50%. Right. So this is in the 10 years after. If you look at Russia's GDP fell 40% between 89 and 98. So it's half the economy. Some other stats here. If you look at the other republics, 30 to 50% of its pre-transition levels in the 90s. So Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Moldova, Tajikistan. And a quick side note here, on the alcohol campaign. So Gorbachev tried to make people stop drinking. There was a big drinking problem, and still there is a bit of a drinking problem in Russia. And one of the things he did was he just decreed that the Moldovans put all of this wine and just cut it, just destroy this wine. Just basically cut the output, cut the production, so that there wouldn't be wine on the market. And even to this day, there's still Moldovan farmers who are keeping the stock. So they just hid their stock in their basements. They got rid of some of it, but they didn't ever bring it to market. But the other thing is that the Moldovan country, Moldavia, had the most wine or vineyards per square meter in the world. And they still have not got back to that level. They still have not recovered economically to where they were before. Yeah.
So really, when the West keep talking about Gorbachev's legacy, regardless of what side of the fence you fall on politically, whether you're left or right, from an economic standpoint and people's livelihood, Gorbachev threw back a good percentage of the world 25 years in terms of economic growth. There's no way of looking at that in a positive way. I mean, I always say to people who ask, with Putin is the Russian revenge for what happened to the Soviet Union. It's now gangster capitalism in Russia, run by some of the most corrupt oligarchs. Yeah, Putin is a good statesman, but is the top of a very corrupt system. I'm not saying that it's corrupt because of him. I'm saying that he is doing the best that he can with an imperfect system.
Sure.
You've probably seen those videos that used to go viral. They don't go viral anymore because of what's going on. Of a bunch of bosses, Putin would go into this boardroom full of bosses and bollock them. Like if you don't get this sorted, get this problem sorted, then I'll just come in and we'll take it over as a state.
Yeah. I know the video very well, actually. Yeah. He says, so and so's name is on this document. Where are you? Yeah, sign this right now. He gets up and then apparently he's like, "Give me back my pen." You know, very, very, you know. But yeah, I mean, talking about legacy, I think what's particularly almost comical is the BBC, when he died, announced today, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last Soviet leader, the man of peace, the man who brought peace, prosperity, and democracy to Russia, to the former Soviet Union, has died. And then other stories. The dictator Putin, the authoritarian regime in Russia, the vengeful war in Ukraine is coming next. So it's like, sorry, hold on. Didn't you say there was peace, democracy, and prosperity? Or was that a different time? Is that so? I think that actually, that I was thinking also about this, is that people are looking at Gorbachev as the last Soviet leader, and him dying is sort of the closing of a chapter of history, and it's the closing of that discussion about the Soviet Union. But actually, in a sense, his death today is almost the end of the post-Soviet era, in the sense that you have this unipolar world where the US can dictate and do what it wants and doesn't have anyone to contest them. His era is that. That is actually what he stands for. He stands for the post-Soviet unipolar invade Libya, invade Iraq, invade Syria, etc. era. And that era is actually ending. So him dying today is the end of that sort of dreamlike, naive idea that the West will hold hands when we're all sing Kumbaya and have a peaceful, post-Soviet liberal democracies and develop together. That's over. That idea is over. That dream is over.
Yeah, it's with I think a lot of what Gorbachev did to Russia. It's almost sort of like comparable to sort of like the Treaty of Versailles, but if the Russians did it to themselves rather than imposing them. Like it didn't need to do any of this, and if it didn't, I've seen reports and things where people have suggested that if the Soviet Union was to have continued through the 90s, its GDP today would actually have been higher than China's.
Right.
It was literally a period that it could have overcome, but it was chose not to by a very small clique of, by the scenes of it, like 30-something leaders of Russia. Obviously, after in 1991, obviously you had the attempted coup in the Soviet Union, which was by sections of the military, not all of it. I think the generals of the Air Force weren't involved, which is one of the reasons why it failed. But most of the KGB were involved, where they captured Gorbachev while he was on holiday in Crimea, and they requested for him to resign. And they set up a state committee of national emergency. The typical broadcaster of this line, the favorite line of any coup: "This is not a coup." It's always a coup when you say it.
The standard, the first line of a coup. It's not a coup. It's not a coup. Right. There's a general reading the news. It's not a coup.
Yeah. Obviously, because Gorbachev refused to resign, and the fact that the military weren't united, that was one of the reasons why the coup failed. Because they needed him to resign to give legitimacy to the committee. I don't know why they just think, why don't we just say that he resigned? Who's going to fact check this? Obviously,
to be honest,
factor in that, and that's obviously where.
I mean, obviously, there's also the other thing. I think with that, the sort of coup attempt, the attempt to try and stop it all was way too late. It was way too late. I mean, I think that there should have been some sort of political intervention in probably 88, 87.
It happened in 88, 89. Then well, if it happened in 88, then it could have saved a lot of Eastern Europe. If it happened in 89, at least it could have saved the Soviet Union.
No, I think so. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is also, you do have to sort of, again, which coming back to the whole leadership crisis, it's interesting that you had, Yeltsin was also a top official. He was very high up in the party. He was running Russia, and also just took this opportunity as soon as this idea, these words, perestroika and glasnost and openness and changing things and whatever. He was gone out the door. He was already running. He was like, yeah, I'm aboard. We're going to break up the union, basically. And you do have this odd meeting in the forest with the Belarusian, the Ukrainian, and Russian leader, where there's lots of different stories about that. They were apparently very drunk, and one of them one of the guys there just read the statement that we're dissolving the union, and they all sort of agreed to it. So this is one element which I think is quite. There was obviously lots of political, calculations and movements and chess pieces and thinking, but some of it also just was just a stumbling by political people that they just stumbled. And that's something that I think we also should try and remember, is that not all politicians make every act as a calculated move. They do sometimes have no idea what they're doing, and sometimes make mistakes, and stupid, silly things as well. This is quite easy.
Politicians. People remember politicians. People remember politicians from a lot of the time from the speeches they give, and I think people forget that political speechwriting is a career in itself. When you hear those really good words that that person you like said, somebody got paid to write those. Stephen Fry used to
right.
Tony Blair, and he now hates Tony Blair. So if you're not a very good arbiter, you get somebody who can write much better than you, and they make all those pretty sounding words. So when you read it afterwards, you think, oh, this guy really knew what he was doing from the outset. And so chances are he didn't. He probably got handed this speech minutes before reading it, and that was probably the first time he ever saw these words.
Right. Well, I mean, on this one specifically, I don't know if we mentioned this when we were talking about the leadership hopefuls a few weeks ago, when we talked about Penny Mordaunt, the Conservative Party leadership. She wrote the book, and apparently there were lines in the book about passing wind after eating breakfast, and obviously she never wrote the words. So that this is point of ghostwriting. So you're talking about people writing speeches. Politicians also endorse books. Sometimes they they haven't written. They say they've written the book, they haven't even read it. So I guess it's another element to it. But the other thing I wanted to show, just for more sort of lightheartedness, is this one here. So Gorbachev, interesting things about Gorbachev. So you've already heard the Clap Your Hands for Gorbachev song. I'm going to play another song later at the end. You've seen the Pizza Hut advert. But Gorbachev also won a Grammy. I couldn't find the music for that one. Sorry. It wasn't music as well. It was the reading of, I believe, some sort of storybook, a children's storybook or something. But Gorbachev won a Grammy in the early 2000s. He has a Grammy, along with his, Nobel Peace Prize and everything else. But this one here is a Louis Vuitton advert that he appeared in, a print. This appeared in Louis Vuitton from the New York Times. They believe it. And this caused a lot of controversy. So this is from about 2007, if I'm not mistaken. And it's Gorbachev, of course, with his Louis Vuitton bag here. I didn't know he liked Louis Vuitton, but apparently he does. And he's driving past the remaining section of the Berlin Wall in Berlin, the art gallery section, I believe. And he's got this little bag here. What's that?
He's driving past the starving rabble.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I think he was 35 years late to trying to tear it down for Reagan. So, but he thought just to go check. But apparently, this caused a lot of trouble though, because there's a magazine here in the in the Louis Vuitton handbag, and this magazine is covering, and that picture, you can't really see it well here. Now, even if you zoom in, you can't see it. So I'll explain what it is talking about the assassination of the killing of Litvinenko in 2006, I believe, the former KGB spy who turned coat to the West and then died from poisoning of some sort, radiation, and obviously everyone says it was Putin or whatever. So apparently Louis Vuitton said, "Oh no, the magazine is just coincidence. It's not political at all."
Not political. How can you get? Gorbachev into an advert and it not be political.
Exactly. Yeah, you put Gorbachev, and you got the Berlin Wall behind you, and you put a magazine with that, and that's all by accident. Okay, yeah, no, it's not political. Sure.
Just
Yeah.
read too far into it.
Right. But yeah, I mean, just trying to think other stuff. I mean,
So
if I were to give one positive thing to old Gorby is that at least when it came to the specifics on the Angola conflict, the Soviet Union had been sending arms and weapons and training and sending some troops and even, I think, fighter pilots and stuff to Angola to fight the apartheid regime, the South African apartheid regime.
Yeah.
And there was a decisive battle in 88 and 89, Quito Carnival, which upon losing, the apartheid forces lost. They then, basically gave out at the negotiating table. So they agreed to hand over Namibia and have elections there. So to basically stop having a colony, to release Mandela in exchange for the Cubans leaving Angola. But they would also pull back. So, that was still under Gorbachev's leadership. He could have quite easily reduced funding, and he could have quite easily, weakened that support, international support. So, he didn't fully, we're not talking about a completely sort of, imperialist Western leader. He was still, the Soviet Union still kept on funding and sending arms and subsidizing. This is the thing. One last thing I want to say is that there's an old term, evil empire, which has been wheeled out now by politicians. And the word empire that they're using there, it implies that the Soviet Union was an empire like the British Empire, that it went places and extracted value, and all this money came back to the core, and they had this very wealthy capital. But if you look at the economic relationships, subsidization is the word that stands out at you. Is that the Soviet Union was subsidizing Vietnam, subsidizing Mongolia, subsidizing Cuba, sending them arms, helping them out with this, making deals that were better trade deals, more preferential to the weaker partner in a sense. So this is an empire that, and ultimately also that actually added to the economic problems, was they were trying to help all of these smaller and less developed countries in the face of either local resistance from a national bourgeois or from imperialist forces too. The idea of the evil empire is a ridiculous concept. It's a ridiculous concept.
It's a lot of modern sort of historical revisionism. A lot of it brought on by popular culture, games like Red Alert and stuff. The Soviet Empire. Mm-hmm. A lot of it's to throw mud at history because nobody's. I think, well, who's going to defend them? And then obviously you get even on the left, sort of like Maoist ultra maniacs who always called the Soviet Union social imperialism and things like that. Well, obviously nobody takes them seriously anyway, so they don't really matter.
They don't. No, they don't.
So I want to just quickly go on. I sent a link over to you. I don't know if you got it. If you could just throw the picture up of the Soviet referendum.
Yes, I'll find that for you. Give me a moment. Yes, good point. I completely forgot. Yes. You sent it to me?
Yes, a messenger.
1 second. Sorry, I'm on a different. My streaming computer is different. Is it an image you wanted, right?
Yeah.
If you could send it in the chat, could you send it in the chat?
Oh no, I can't.
Private chat here.
I'm on 2 different computers.
Okay, I'll find it. I can. Okay, give me a moment. But yeah, so this is just to give people context. This is the referendum that they held in 1991, right?
Yep. This was the people's last chance to preserve the Soviet Union. And obviously, I think the results for it, for anyone who doesn't know this tidbit of history or has the slightest bit of respect for democracy, would shock people to see the actual results of it. Because it is quite telling.
Let me show you. There we go. Okay, got it. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay, there we go. So, Soviet referendum. Do you consider it necessary to preserve the Union of Soviet Social Republics as a renewed federation of equal sovereign republics in which the rights and freedoms of a person of any nationality will be fully guaranteed? So, people that said yes, 77.85%, no, 22.15%. and other statistics that don't matter. So yeah, nearly 78%. We will call it 78%. 78% of the population. So that's 113 million votes said yes. Let's keep the Soviet Union. Let's keep it. And yeah, that was ignored. That was not.
This isn't. This would be a new federation, so it's not the USSRs and the United Socialist Republics. It would be United Sovereign Republic. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's communist or Soviet, but it does mean the geopolitical entity maintains. A lot of people hear that quote by Putin saying that the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century. This is what he's referring to, because the breakup of it obviously left a lot of native Russians outside of Russia.
Yes.
Which generally caused the crisis that we're in now in Ukraine and South Odessa. This is the fallout of these decisions that were made back then. I think a lot of people now, as they do with a lot of things, even when talking about things like World War II, people like each event to be its own episode, like a serialized TV show. You don't need to watch the previous one, but you do. If you just read about World War II without knowing about World War I, it won't make sense. World War II in itself makes more sense if you view it as World War I Part 2. What's going on now with Russia and its neighbors is the direct result of those actions that happened then. And if those actions happened, these actions would have no context to happen.
Absolutely. I think also the thing to say, I think I forgot to mention this, was he got the Nobel Peace Prize for apparent East-West relations, an improvement of East-West relations. But the idea of a peace prize for an act that caused multiple wars. I mean, you had a war in Abkhazia, a war in Georgia. You had war in Transnistria, Moldavia. You had inter-ethnic conflicts in the stands in some of the Central Asian republics. You had then later an insurgency in Chechnya. The idea that this was a peaceful moment, that this was an act of peace, is ignores all of the death and killing and war, like actual war that happened. And of course, like you said, we are where we are today because of this man's leadership, because of this. That is his legacy, a shattered, broken puzzle piece of remaining nations, which are all poorer now, and with war again. And also this idea of the West, an improvement of East-West relations. I mean, certainly an improvement for the West, who were then given access to all of these oil markets, natural resources. And I mean, there's an audiobook by a guy called Bill Browder. It's called The Red Notice, and and Bill Browder is actually, his grandfather was one of the founders of the Communist Party of the USA, but he has become a venture capitalist, and he went to the Soviet Union in the early 90s, late 80s, and set up business. He was a stockbroker, and he explains and describes how you had pension funds, bus companies, factories, all sorts of huge state entities, which, under the brilliant plan to privatize everything, people had shares. They didn't know how much they were worth. So you had these huge companies worth who knows what on the stock market. Their real value on a real stock market would be millions and millions. They were selling them for $5 or $10. You literally had, arguably, and I think this is true, the biggest heist, the biggest theft, the biggest extraction of wealth in history, because you had all of the wealth of the Soviet Union, of the Soviet people, in all of the state companies and in all of that stuff that was given away to oligarchs and also to Westerners, and then shipped to London. Now you have these oligarchs living in London, and also all over the world. That is the legacy, in a sense. A stripped country with the people that he supposedly stood for hating him. So, and not.
You said oligarchs. I saw a picture the other day, because obviously we don't call Ukrainian. We used to call Ukrainian oligarchs as well. They don't anymore. Now they call them entrepreneurs or tycoons.
And what do we call them now?
Now they're on our side. But one of them died in the war. He was meant to be. He owns one of the biggest sort of wheat exporters in Ukraine. the picture the BBC went with was a picture that it could have just been any Russian. So Ukrainian man
Yes.
with his very, very 80s Ukrainian haircut, big suit, big chest, with his Order of Hero of Ukraine pin that looks exactly like the Hero of Russia one, the star one.
Yes.
Tycoon. So the week later, when you had a Russian businessman wearing the exact same outfit, looking the exact same way, you called him an oligarch. But these two words now have just become the fact that if you Google
Right.
only now refers to Russians. It's like, why?
Yes. Yeah.
Russian.
Only Russian. Has to be Russian. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm gonna play this this song now, which is another gem. We can decide if it's a crime or not from this era, and this one is called. The lyrics actually you'll see. Actually, yeah, I'll let you see if you can understand it. Hold on 1 second. Here we go. All right.
Спасибо, Родна, в киномбоном боте, товарищ Горбачев. Ти ни сприятният воронин, чтоб то маби ти рабочки. Не ревнуш, а напурнован чеховниец на попков. Единственное пропонio но Сталин? Нет. Сибирия? Нет. Калашников? Нет. Афганистан? Нет. Ленин? Барышников? Евтушенко? Стравинский? Товарищ Горбачев, до свидания. I know I'm gonna press you to the line.
So Soviet Weird Al Yankovic.
So there you go. Yeah, I think it might be. But yeah, there's the line there. Tavarish Gorbachev, do svidania. So, Comrade Gorbachev, goodbye. So yeah, another piece of beautiful post-Soviet music. I think we're done for tonight. Then, Chris, I think if we have any other things to catch up, we can. Yeah, we can obviously add on if we miss anything for next week. We can fill in what we've missed out on what we haven't said about Gorbachev. But yeah, thank you very much.
Right, it's good speaking to you again. I'll see you next week.
Great. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.